Fairs and Expositions. And just a couple of ground rules real quick. As you heard, we are recording this workshop. So if you weren't able to attend it, or if there's something you missed or you wanted to go over again, it will be available on our website once we are done with this and get it posted. So wanted to start with that. And also, if you have any questions or any comments or anything, if you could put those into the chat. Sarah with CDFA is also on this workshop, so she'll be go ahead and moderating those chats or any questions that come through. And also, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat so that we know who's asking the questions. And we'll go ahead and get started with that. We'll start again with the agenda real quick. Introductions, we'll go into the program overview, funding purpose, and the timeline of where we're at and where we're headed. And then the CRC program website, go through a couple of links on there, and then go over some of the other questions and answers that maybe I didn't address during the rest of the presentation, and we'll touch base on those at the end. And if there's anything else miscellaneous wise that we can talk about at the end. So for introductions, as you probably know, with the CDFA Fairs and Expositions branch, there's myself, and we have a couple other people, I believe, from our branch and from our department that are on the phone call or the workshop today. And if you can introduce yourself, Sarah, you can start since I can see you on, and Kathy, I think, after.
Hi, my name is Sarah Pelly, and I'm with CDFA Fairs and Expositions branch, and I'm a supervisor.
Hi, my name is Kathy Diaz. I am the Director for Marketing Services, the division under which Fairs and Expositions operates. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you. And then also on the call with us, I wanted to introduce our technical assistance provider team, which are the team members from California Construction Authority. So if you guys can do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the rest of the presentation here.
My name is Ben Brown, helping with the grant writing and the technical assistance.
I'm Jasmine Hadeen. I'm the person that mainly people have been contacting for the technical assistance to answer just the basic kind of questions. So.
And I'm Randy Crabtree. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for California Construction Authority. We are happy to be helping out with technical assistance. I apologize, I'm not on camera right now. I'm actually driving from a construction site for another side of the Community Resiliency Center. So look forward to hearing the discussion today during the workshop, and I should be on video here in about 20 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. I think that is it. So we'll move on to a quick introduction of the program funding, an overview, which all this information, if you've had a chance to already go through the guidelines and read a little bit more about the funding, this is more repetitive, but the California Department of Food and Agriculture Fairs and Expositions branch specifically had received an allocation of $150 million in general fund monies, and this was from the Budget Act of 2021 to support the development and enhancement of the community resilience centers throughout the state. A portion of that entire $150 million will be allocated for projects specifically outside of the fair network, which is kind of what our specialty is here at Fairs and Expositions, and that's in the amount of $38 million. And so that is why you all are here, because that $38 million will be awarded through the competitive application process, which I'm sure most of you have already started through AmpliFund. And a little bit more overview on the program and the funding. That, like I mentioned, the total available funding for this competitive application process is $38 million. The minimum grant award is $5 million. So when you are putting your applications together, they should be at a minimum of $5 million. Because of that minimum grant award, I know there's been some questions. I think somewhere in AmpliFund, when we first started putting our information in there regarding the program, we had anticipated that we would have about 10 awards, at least a minimum of 10 awards. And I think that was back when we didn't have a minimum grant award. So given that we do have that minimum grant award of $5 million, we're anticipating a maximum number of 7 awards. but obviously depending on what the applications are that we get and how much those grant requests are for, that number could be lower. And as far as the funding, because it is through general fund monies, we do have a time frame that we have to meet with these funds. So these $38 million will expire on June 30th of 2026. So we are on a tight timeline. And I also wanted to mention that these funds, and we can go over this a little bit more down towards the end, but I did want to mention that everybody is aware that this is a reimbursable grant process. And so what that means is that in order to be able to get reimbursed for the expenses that have been incurred, the applicant or whoever gets the projects would have to upfront some of the cost. And so that's very important as you're submitting financials, as you're deciding who the applicant is, and as you're filling out the budget. So we can go on here to the program overview and the purpose of our program to describe a little bit more of what the intent is for these funds. And so again, they're available to improve community facilities, to enhance the state's emergency preparedness capabilities, particularly in response to climate change, as that's very important these days, and a big focus of the funding that we have been receiving. And the funding shall be to support infrastructure for emergency evacuation, shelter camps during emergency events, and critical deferred maintenance. So that's really the big highlight of the funding and what the focus is. But as a secondary goal of this program, it's also to equip communities with facilities that will provide long-term year-round services and activities. So, you know, we're not going to be in a state of emergency, hopefully year-round. That's only certain, cases throughout the year, depending on where you're at in the state, because, depending on where you're at, it's going to be a different event that happens for emergencies. And so aside from serving as an emergency and evacuation shelter, these projects should also be helping the community throughout the year and serving as for different purposes through civic, social, education, and economic development programming. So some of the ideas that we're focusing on with these projects, and this might help in putting in these keywords as you're filling out your application, are the elements that we have for the infrastructure. So things like including the cooling and heating centers, clean air centers, extending emergency evacuation response centers. So that would be equipped with the commercial kitchens, shower facilities, broadband. So if your application covers any of these, then you're definitely on the right track for what the purpose is of the funding. And before I ask for any questions, or if we go over some questions, I wanted to go over the timeline of where we're at and where we're headed, like I mentioned. So our application solicitation process started in December, right at the end of December, and a 60-day process will put us right at February 27th. I think the actual 60 days fell on the 25th of February. But given that that falls on a Saturday, we extended it to the 27th. So not very long from now. So hopefully this workshop is very helpful. And we have set a plan also with Jasmine and CCA as a technical assistance provider to kind of really focus on getting as many applications finalized within the next few days. And so once that application period closes, our application review process will begin pretty quickly after that, just because we're trying to meet the deadlines. So that'll put us right at March and into May. No specific dates because, and even with us putting our application out, we're learning as we go. So a lot of things just kind of get extended. So that's kind of the time frame that we have for application review. And then we plan on doing the award announcement sometime in July. And then, like I mentioned, agreement terms will go through June 30th of 2026. So very quick process. And then once the agreement terms have gone in, just so that you're all aware as applicants, if you get awarded throughout the agreement term, the communication will be with CDFA for the most part, and that Fairs and Expositions will be the ones handling your reimbursement request. Once we get it at fairs and expositions, we have to send it through our financial services branch. They do one more review on it, and then it gets processed over to the state controller's office, who cuts the check. So there are a couple processes that go through with the agreement terms, but a lot of that we can focus if you become an awardee of these funds. And if you have any other questions on that that you think might affect what you put in the application, we can also touch base on that. And let's see, before we go through the website, let me see real quick what our questions look like here. Okay, it looks like we just have introductions so far, so perfect. I think what we can do then is I'll keep going just because we've received a lot of questions through email, and Jasmine has been keeping a list too of questions that she's received, a lot of repetitive stuff. So it's nice to see, you know, that what we've missed in the guidelines and what we can do better for next time. So I appreciate everybody's patience and cooperation as you fill out your applications. And so hopefully most have already found most of our materials that we have for the application and where that application link is at. But I still want to do a quick run through just to make sure that I covered everything. So as you can see here, you have our link to the Fairs and Expositions branch. And the FCRCP is specific to the program. And so you'll see the information right underneath that. And let me go ahead and click on this and see if I could do, oh, let's see. Can you all see the website here? Yes, okay, perfect. I'm getting some nods, so I'll take it. All right, so once you click on the link, and this will be copied onto our website, so you'll have access to this link. You will see the application material. So this is all that pertains to the community resilience centers, to the $38 million. So right here, right at the top, you'll see our guidelines. This has a lot of the information of how to fill out your application, what the priority communities are, how the process will work once you get awarded. A lot of the bulk of the information that pertains to this grant and the application is in there. And then the second application material here is the template. So if you haven't filled out your budget yet, this is the place that you'll go in. You'll fill it out for the next 3 fiscal years because that's how long we have to finish these projects, and then filling in the amounts under each of the sections. So like I mentioned, this is kind of our first time doing a competitive process. So as I was going through and we were getting questions, I realized that this budget template maybe is not as consistent with what's in the guidelines. So if you do have questions still with the budget, we can definitely answer those as we go. And Jasmine and CDFA or CCA and CDFA will get together and make sure that we're addressing those questions, because some of the budget categories within the guidelines don't exactly match up what's on the budget template. So at this point, it's too late to make changes to the budget template or to the guidelines. So if there's any questions that you still have as you're filling it out, we can help figure out where those pieces go. And then the third material here is the technical assistance provider information. So like they were introduced, California Construction Authority. So the contact would be Jasmine. Here's her email address and her phone number. So if you have any questions, she has been great at making sure that she's understanding the materials and having open communication with CDFA. So there are still questions that we have even at CDFA within our department that we're trying to figure out specific to construction projects. And so we still have time to address those, but just make sure that those are being sent over to Jasmine so we can help you out with those. The fourth, or the next item here under application materials, is a very simple version of all the questions and all the information that is provided within Amplifund. And if you don't know already, Amplifund is the portal that we're using for the applications. So it's not only for the applicants to submit their applications, but also for the reviewers from our review committee to go through and review the information. So they're reviewing it exactly how it is put into Amplifund. There will be a scoring process, a rubric, and as well as a section for them to justify their score on the application for every question. So that's the application questions. And the reason why we put that separate as a separate link is because, and I don't know if a lot of you have ran into this or not, but once you get into Amplifund, if you are sitting on one page for too long, even if you are inputting information in there, sometimes it just kicks you out without saving your answers that you've been putting in there. And so we try to make that clear at the beginning of the application that if you don't have your answers ready to go, or you plan to spend, I think it's more than 20 minutes at a page, that maybe just save it and then come back to it, because especially because the questions, we don't have a limit on for your answers, for a character limit or length on there. So what happens is if you sit there and you start typing things out, and then after 20 minutes, it'll just erase it. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that, so that you didn't run into that if you haven't already. And
Do you want to start with some questions or finish this up before you take questions from the chat?
Let me just finish the application materials and then we can go into the questions. So then the last item here under the application materials list would be our public comment summary and responses. So last year we had a public comment period where we had some comments come through. We provided our responses to that, and that can be found on this link here. And then the final thing would be the application link, which is this button right here. You just click it. Let's see where it takes us. Okay, so it takes us to Amplifund right away, and then it has all the information on the funding that we have. And then if you haven't already, here's where you click to apply. Saving it, I've tried that before and it doesn't really do anything. It just has you put in your information, and then it just puts you on our list that you've started an application. But when you actually hit apply is when it requires you to start putting in some information. And so those are the two buttons here. You can download it if you want, but this is going to do the same thing as what we have saved here as the application questions. And then here's a little bit more information, a lot of repetitive stuff that I've already mentioned about the program and the funding, and then our Q&A workshop, which this is the last workshop that we expect to have. If for some reason something comes up and we have different information, or we have a big push for something else down the road, or even after we've awarded the projects and the grants, then we'll add more information under this section here. But if you're interested in any new information, this is definitely the place to come check. Okay, we can start with some questions real quick, Sarah.
Okay, can we upload more than 3 support letters?
Yes, yeah. And there's, I think Amplifund, so Amplifund is also new to CDFA. So we haven't run into any issues that there's like a maximum limit or a maximum storage that can be put on there. So yes, definitely.
Can the funding be used for new purpose-built construction?
Yes. So with the funding, it can be new builds, or it can be used to update existing infrastructure. So yeah, for both.
Can you clarify the point on the cap of 25% on labor costs? Does this include the professional services of A&E and such?
If you can send that question, I believe we've received that question. We are looking into that. But if you can send that one to Jasmine, that would be great. And we'll follow up with you with that answer, because that's one of the areas that is still we're trying to figure out the best way to address it. Especially with the way that our process works. Like I mentioned earlier, we are on a reimbursable grant process, which makes it difficult with the whole funding process and how the labor costs and all the cost breakdowns should be, because of the timing that we have. So if you can send that one to Jasmine, that would be awesome. And we'll follow up with you.
Can the funding be used for programming operations at the center during the grant period?
Say that one more time.
Can the funding be used for programming operations at the center during the grant period?
I would say no, because we are working on updating the existing facility. So it's more for, like I said, the elements that we had talked about, and I'll go back to the PowerPoint here. So the funding is meant to cover the elements that we talked about. So like the heating and air, commercial kitchen. So it's more for the infrastructure than it is for programming.
Olivia, you asked the question and your hand is raised. Do you want to
Sorry.
explain?
I did want to explain that because I mean the point of a community resilience center is both the the acute climate events and the long-term social resilience. And so I guess it's confusing to me that we couldn't use some of the funds to support that long-term social resilience piece, even though that's like a very key aspect of the grant itself.
Kathy, did you have follow-up? Your hand's up.
Yes, and the reason for the limitation in terms of using it for any kind of operations is that the source of the funds, it was allocated for infrastructure. I understand that there are other organizations such as SGC that maybe has received funding or will be getting funding that would allow for operations. But the portion of the funding, the allocation that we have is specifically for infrastructure. So that's a limitation that came attached to the funds becoming available. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
How detailed does the planning need to be? Should we already have project plans in place with regards to infrastructure or project design?
So if you have those plans already ready to go, that is awesome. Because as you probably know with construction projects, they do take a long time to complete. And especially if you're adding the design phase or the pre-development, that's obviously going to take longer. And so especially for the $5 million minimum grant awards, it's not, just a quick project that can be done and turned around rather quickly. And so with that being said, if you have designs and you have information, please put that information into your application, as much information as you can. But again, focus on quality when you're submitting your application, not so much quantity, because even though there is no character limit, which is something that I was going to go into next, we just really want to focus on the project and what it is for the plan. So if you don't have designs already, that doesn't mean that you're going to get a lower score or you're going to be disqualified, because we do allow within this program about 1 year for pre-development activities. And so that would be the design phase, putting plans together, getting permits together so that you can start construction. And so the 1 year of that and about 20% of the grant award can be used for that, as long as you request that in the application and you make that obvious within the application. And then the rest of the time and the rest of the funds would be to focus on the actual construction. So whether that's updating the HVAC or putting in a commercial kitchen or whatever your project is, that's what the remaining time will be for. But if you already have design or you've already started it, then great. We are getting somebody with construction background on our review committee. And so that way they can also look at your application, review it and say, hey, yes, that's doable. No, that's not doable within that time frame. And so definitely, if you have designed, if you have any pre-development work already, send that over with your application. If not, that's nothing to worry about. That's what that first year is for. But make sure that when you fill out your, and I'm sorry if I'm repetitive as we go through the rest of the workshop, but if you are, whatever you put into the budget and whatever you put into the application, make sure that it focuses on what you are requesting through this award. So if you already have funds from another source, or you have funds from your own organization or another grant or whatever the case may be, let us know in the application in the narrative piece, but don't put that as part of your budget. If you would prefer to put in a separate budget that shows like the total scope and the total what you expect to spend for the entire project, then definitely do that. But the budget that we have in that template is only for what you are requesting through CDFA, through this CRC program application. Okay, I hope I answered that.
Please clarify the level of detail needed on the budget. The template format invites much less detail than implied in the instructions.
Yes, and that's what I mentioned as I was going through the guidelines earlier in the application material. So in the guidelines, it's definitely broken down a little bit more by budget categories. So you have in there like your supplies, your equipment, your labor, that kind of stuff. And then in the application, or sorry, in the budget template, it's not broken down the same. So for the purpose of this application, I would go with what's on the budget template and try to best fit your cost into the budget template, into that spreadsheet. And then if you have any further questions, please reach out to Jasmine CCA, and we will follow up with you and figure out a way to best put that into your budget template.
I think we've answered this, but I want to address all questions. It is our project. If our project site contains other elements funded by different grants, for example, a park, do you want us to mention this in the application, or is it confusing? We have matching funds as well, and it wasn't clear if we should mention those anywhere.
Okay, repeat that one more time.
If our project site contains other elements funded by different grants, for example, a park, do you want us to mention this in the application? And we have matching funds as well, and it isn't clear if we should mention those as well.
Okay, so that's kind of like a two-part thing. So it wouldn't hurt to mention it within your application, just so that we are aware of what is happening with the total scope of the project. But when, like I mentioned, so when you're going to fill out the budget piece and the budget template, just make sure you're only focusing on the amount you're requesting from CDFA, from the CRC program. And so if you do have funding, we definitely want to know about it, because whether it's matching, so again, matching is not a requirement. Any matching amounts is not a requirement for this grant. You can have basically $0 towards this project, but the important thing is to remember that you will need upfront cost to be able to get this project started. So even though we select awardees that will get anywhere from $5 million to obviously $38 million is our max, so to a larger number below $38 million, you will have to upfront some sort of amount to get that project started, and then that's when the reimbursements will kick in. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind as you're filling this application in, and as you're picking who your applicant is, making sure that the applicant is going to be able to support that process as we go through. And before I get into too much detail, do we have more questions, or is that it, Sarah?
Yes, there's more.
Okay, I'm wondering if I should just finish the presentation so I'm not reiterating a lot, and then we can address those at the end.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just keep going because I put some stuff on the screen already, and then at the end, we can kind of go over the questions again. So hopefully I can answer a lot of these questions within the next few slides. So with the AmpliFund application, only one application can be submitted per applicant. And I don't think the system will tell you, yes, you've already put in an application, you can't submit another application. But so just keep that in mind, that we're only going to look at one application per applicant. So when we go through and do our first administrative review, we're going to look at kind of whatever the first one is, as long as it's submitted per applicant. Again, no limit character. Oh, there's limit in there twice. So there's no character limit or narrative length requirement. So again, reiterating, please keep it for quality and not so much quantity, because we wanted to keep it open because a lot of people have more already happening with their project than others. So that's it. That's all I wanted to mention there. Just make sure you're focusing on what the intent of the project is and describe it as best as possible there. Multiple users can access the application, and that's by clicking the user button and adding a user to assist with entering the information. And I do have a screenshot of that I will follow up with, and we can post that to our website also in case you still have time or want to do that, if that is an option. And then also multiple locations can be applied for under one application, as long as the locations are the same kind. So if you have 3 different schools within your community or within your county, depending on who's putting the application in, if they're in the same general area, and you have like a set of 3 schools that can be used for these emergency responses, then you can set the 3 of them there, because what we're figuring out is that a lot of applicants are having a hard time meeting that $5 million threshold for a minimum. And so if you have 3 schools, 3 libraries, or whatever other community centers that are the same kind, you can definitely put those under one application. Other information, I know we've received a lot of questions, especially from like the cities or the counties that are a little larger than like a nonprofit per se. So they're asking what kind of financial documents should we be submitting? And you know, no matter what size you are or who you are, it's all going to be audited financial statements. And specifically for governmental entities like the county or like the city, they're referred to as the annual comprehensive financial report. So I know we received that a couple times, so I just wanted to put that in there. And then also for the budget, this is just reiterating the budget template used only for the CDFA grant funds requested, and no matching amount is required. And another question that we received that I wanted to touch on here, and again, if you are interested in this and you think it's going to affect how you put in your budget, please let us know, because with the advance payments, CDFA really has like a limit, not so much on the percentage, but on how much can be advanced. When you're dealing with $5 million minimum projects, it's going to be a big advance if we're sticking to like that 25% threshold. So please reach out to us if that's something that you are interested in before assuming that you're going to get the advance. There's a couple reasons for that. And so one of them is that the amount should not exceed a 3-month period. That's just kind of based on the code of regulations. But our CDFA grants has much stricter regular guidelines, I guess, on that. And so I want to make sure, specific to your project and the amount that you're requesting, that we're not missing anything. So if you have any other questions or would like additional information on that, please reach out and then we can address that. But when you are building your budget, please make sure that you're not assuming or counting on those advance funds, because that may not be the case. So just wanted to point that out. And then a couple other things as far as what was requested or what was brought to our attention was like the project area and project location that is listed throughout the application. There really is no difference with that. One focuses more on like the general area, I think, specific to like the priority communities, whereas the project location is specific to where that project is going to be. And so they're interchangeable. So really no big difference there, but know that with the mapping tools, we are using those, and those are kind of on a big scale, on a larger scale. So we're focusing on the area. And then also, we're not just using those the mapping tools to decide whether or not, or to determine whether or not you're in a severely disadvantaged area or an unincorporated area, because those tools are helpful. But what we've realized also is that depending on your location, you may not be in a severely disadvantaged area, but during an emergency, you're going to be serving those community and the public from disadvantaged areas. And so even though the mapping tool may not say that, that's why it's really important that you put that in the narrative and you tell us how you are serving those communities, even though your location itself, where the project is going to be, is not in a disadvantaged community. So that's another important point that I don't think is super clear in the guidelines, but I definitely wanted to bring that up, because even though, like I said, your address may not show up on that mapping tool as a disadvantaged area, what you provide to us in the application and the narrative is going to be important. And then as a requirement, as you know, for the application are also 3 letters of support. One of the earlier questions was if there could be more than 3 letters submitted. There's no issue with that. But as long as there's a minimum of 3 letters, which is a requirement, that will be reviewed as part of the review for the scoring for the application process. And so some examples that we've received, we've gotten hard copies in the mail already, and these all count. And any other ideas you have, feel free to share or to ask. But like the sheriff's office or the local office of emergency services, any legislators within your area, school officials, any of those can count as a letter of support from community leaders. All right. So I think before I get too far here, so the questions and answers, we do have a Q&A sheet that we've already started with the questions that we've received between CDFA and CCA. So we do plan to post those on our website as well. So it'll be a lot of reiterating what we've already said today within the workshop, but just put it on paper. And also any other questions that we've received today, we can add those to the list. And then last day to submit questions or a draft for technical assistance review. We have a February 22nd, which is next Wednesday. So if you have any questions or anything to submit, I think we'll be a little bit more flexible on the questions up until the day of submitting. But if you have any draft or anything that you really need help with that might be a little bit more time consuming, please send that to CCA by February 22nd. That way they still have a few days to review before the due date. All right. So we can go back to questions now.
Is there a size limit on files for upload? Design docs are very large.
I did ask that of Amplifund because we don't operate Amplifund, but I did ask that question because of the design files. And we were told no, that it should be able to accept any size. So if you end up running into an issue, because I think you can submit those as a PDF, but if you run into any issues, let us know. But we did ask and there shouldn't be an issue with that.
Is there a max grant limit?
So given that we only have $38 million total for this entire program, I guess that's considered our max. So I don't know that you would want to submit something for $38 million. You could, but I don't think our goal is to award just one applicant. But with that being said, I mean, that could be anywhere from 5 million to 38 million. Really that's kind of our range, but anywhere in between would be great.
Can you provide an example of an activity that meets the grant objective of building social infrastructure since programming is not eligible to be funded?
So with that point, and I think this is the approach that our program was taking on this with the program. So the purpose is to build the infrastructure, to build a location, a resource center, so that, and that's what the purpose of the funding is for, so that you can have this resource center within your community. And then to be able to serve the community after the project is done, in case of emergency events or evacuation events. That is obviously kind of the main goal of this, once the structure is done, once the community center is done. That is so that in the case of an earthquake, in case of whatever the case might be, whatever climate event we might have in your area that is going to be impacted, that the community can come to. So that's the main focus. Secondary goal is for those other social, economic, and every other thing that we had listed on there in the programming. That's what for the rest of the year, that's what this building could be used for. And so while the funding doesn't cover those, we're really covering the infrastructure. I don't know how better to explain that. And maybe Kathy, you can jump in and if you have any better way to describe that. But really the funding is just to focus on the infrastructure and creating that community center.
Yes, I mean, anything that has to do with the building of the physical infrastructure, it has to be a physical facility you're building. Anything else that has to do with programmatic activities, that really would not be within what we can do. So I would say anything that's a physical structure, and especially with the parameters that we provided one where you can used during emergencies, for emergencies, but it can also have a use to benefit the community during non-emergency times. Again, it can be something that you build from scratch, can be something that you enhance. An example that I think maybe this helps, that has been mentioned quite a bit, is upgrading HVAC systems at libraries, because they have the space and they may be able to work as cooling and warming centers. But again, it's a physical facility. Thank you.
Perfect. Will partial funding be approved? For example, if we submit a 10 million project, would portions of the project be approved for a lower grant awarded than we requested?
So CDFA did have a disclaimer in the guidelines that we could select a different budget amount or award amount, I guess. But it would have to depend on how the project is laid out. So if you put the application in and it's kind of broken down in different sections to allow us for that, for the opportunity to allow like a de-scoped project, then we probably would look at that. However, if you did it as one entire project and you said, okay, here's $10 million, we're probably going to focus on that larger amount. And so we do have a CPA that will be on board with this review process also of the applications. They will be looking at not just like what you submitted for financials to make sure that you're able to support this project, but also comparing that to the budget and what you submitted for the grant request. And so I wouldn't recommend breaking it down. I would recommend focusing on the big picture, because I think with the $38 million and the $5 million minimum, we're not going to be looking at so much as breaking down the projects, but the entire picture. So I wouldn't recommend that, but if Kathy, you wanted to jump in on that.
Yes, Sophia, thank you. I think also a thing to keep in mind for the project to be viable under our scope, you have to make sure it can be completed 100% by the deadline. So I realize there may be different circumstances that may allow for different types of approaches, but if you have something that is part of a larger project that won't be completed for a period of time that exceeds our deadline, it would make it more difficult for us to be able to validate that the portion of the work has been completed. I would think that would tend to make it less competitive. You want to be able to adhere to the parameters. So I can, but then again, on the other hand, I can see someone coming up with a project that is associated with a larger project, but as a subcomponent may be able to apply for that component. It makes it a little more challenging, I realize, for the applicant to just ask for funding for a component of a larger project, but perhaps there may be situations where that is very viable under the parameters we provided. So it would have to be on a case-by-case basis, but always keeping in mind the guidelines would still apply. We would still need to be able to consider the project viable within the time frame we provide and in compliance with the rest of the parameters. So if it won't be, we won't be able to review it, even if it's done in time, if it doesn't meet the guidelines, if it's part of a project that doesn't necessarily adhere to the scope of this grant, all those things may not make it as, may lower your chances.
What is the expected reimbursement turnaround? 3 months, 6 months, so forth?
What did I do here? Okay, so with the reimbursements, our process, once we receive the reimbursement request at fairs and expositions, it usually takes us, assuming that we have all the information that we need and there's nothing missing, and we don't have any discrepancies on the information, it usually gets processed within our office 3 to 5 days at the latest. And then from us, it goes to our financial services branch within the department. They take at least another week to 2 weeks to process it on their end. And then once they've approved it, then it gets requested to the state controller's office. And then from the state controller's office, it gets mailed to you. So that process entirely could take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks between or from the time that you submit your reimbursement request to the time that you actually see a check back to you. So that's kind of where we're at with the timeline right now. We've tried different things to try to make that shorter, but unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at. And so that falls with the contractors too. Most contractors request a payment, within 30 days. So once they've submitted, so we really try to be cautious of where we're at with our timelines, dealing with construction projects. Something else to note is we'll request the reimbursement request on a quarterly basis. With how fast these projects are going to be completed and how much work needs to be done. If you're starting from scratch, even if you're not with the pre-development phases, the funds are gonna, or the invoices and the costs are gonna incur pretty quick. And so just having open communication between CDFA and the awardee is gonna be very important when we get to that point so that we can make sure that all that gets turned around rather quickly.
For the narrative, there isn't really a work plan template, but it asks for discrete tasks, etc. Can you clarify what that should look like or how much detail there needs to be?
So with that, and DCA, I don't know if you have a better description for that as far as like with the scope, you guys deal with the scope a lot more than we have. We just kind of get it once it's all ready to go and submit it to our grant request. But maybe Randy, can you jump in on that? How much information gets put into the scope side of it?
Randy, unfortunately, is
did he
trying
log
to
off?
log into the call. Yeah,
Okay.
he just got back into the office.
Okay, so with that, I mean, from what I've seen and what we've talked about, that we would expect from these applications would be more of from the beginning, so it's either whether you need to start the design phase, pre-development work, or go straight into construction. And so if you have whatever details you have from the very beginning to the end and how you expect to make that work with the timeline for the 3 years that we have, that would be huge, just to make sure you put as much detail in there that you think is important. So that's really what we'll be basing the review off of. And like I said, we'll have somebody with a construction background. So hopefully, there's enough detail in there that can support what the project is going to be and where it's headed. Because then once we have a smaller number, we'll go through and most likely do another level of evaluation. And so this is where, before we actually select the applications to award or the projects to award, this is where we might reach out to the applicant and ask for a little bit more information. To say, okay, this is kind of your big idea, but we need a little bit more details in this certain section, whether that's in the financial section or in the scope, or, I mean, the timeline, unfortunately, it is what it is. We have 3 years. So if you can make it work within those 3 years and our reviewers think that, yeah, we can make that happen, then that's kind of already an in. But with the details and making sure you're serving the purpose of the grant and the program, that's probably going to be the most important. And Kathy, I see your hand.
Yes, about the deadline, I wanted to mention it is our intent to apply this fall before the legislature to ask for an extension to use those funds. So maybe that timeline would be extended. That is a possibility. We realize that, especially currently, it is very difficult to complete a construction project. However, that at this point is something that still needs to happen. It's too early for us to be able to apply for that request. So that's why we have not done it. But FYI, that's a possibility, but we cannot promise the outcome.
And sorry, Sarah, real quick, Kathy, if we get that extension, is that 2 years?
I believe that's the longest we can ask for an extension for that funding, yes.
Is CEQA a CDFA program requirement?
So it's CEQA. I don't think it's a CDFA requirement, but as much as it is a construction requirement. So when you're actually going through the process, CEQA is definitely going to be an aspect of the pre-development phase, because any plan reviewer or inspector is going to ask for that. So it's not so much CDFA as it is for actual construction work.
A tribal,
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. I believe a lot of it will have to do with local requirements as well. So there may be different arms of government that may require that. So if it is something that's required, depending on the location of the site, it is something that may already be flagged for requiring a CEQA inspection, but it is not part of our requirements. We've done our best to keep requirements as simple as possible.
are tribal elders considered community leaders for letters of support?
I wouldn't see why not. Kathy, do you have?
Yes,
Any-
yes, they are tribal communities. That is one of the roles of the leaders. So yes, they would be considered respected members of the community, and we would consider those as equivalents. Yes.
Thank you.
Does community engagement need to happen prior to the application submission, or can this be something we do during the planning timeframe?
So with the community engagement, really our focus with that was obviously as you reach out to community leaders for those letters of support, that's kind of where the biggest portion of the community engagement I think is going to happen for this. But obviously, you know, depending on what your organization is or what the project is, you're talking to the community, right? And you're trying to figure out if your community center really is that location that's best going to be the resource for your area, and especially during these emergency and evacuation events. So if that's not really the center that your community relies on during these events, then maybe this program isn't really what the focus should be on for this program, for this application. And so that's really where our community engagement piece was coming in. So making sure that you're communicating with the community to make sure that, yes, this is a center that we're going to rely on to go to in case of an emergency center. And then when it's not an emergency event, we're going to use this community center for other activities throughout the year. So obviously you wouldn't be putting in this application if you didn't think that it was going to meet those two goals. And so that's really where our focus was coming from for the community engagement. And Kathy, feel free to jump in if you have any other thoughts too.
I think you did a great job covering that. Thank you.
Thanks.
What are you looking for in letters of support? Description of community partnership or endorsement of a project?
With the letters of support, yeah, all of the above. So however your community leaders are supporting your project and the community center throughout the entire process. So your community letters are kind of going to be the supporters of these projects outside of the applicant. And they're going to be the one vouching that, you know, like I mentioned, that these are going to be the community centers that the community is going to go to, not just for emergency centers, but also throughout the year for other resources or other programming. So really, that's what the letters of support should say, and how they have those relationships with the applicant or with the community center. And basically just supporting the project and why that relationship is there and how that relationship formed. That's really what we're looking for in the letters of support.
Are there word counts on the narrative questions?
No word counts, but focus on quality over quantity with those. We're not grading, we're not scoring on how many words or how many characters. It's more on the information that's there. But depending on the project, some applicants are going to have more to justify or to have details on than others. So.
Is the deadline of June 30th, 2026 pertaining to completed construction or reimbursement?
That is for completed construction. So we still can receive reimbursement requests after June 30th of the 2026 date, but those invoices cannot be past that. That is the performance period. So anything that happens after June 30th, we cannot reimburse. So even though the construction project might be final or being finalized at that point, anything after that, we cannot accept a reimbursement for. But if you have work that's completed before then yes, we can kind of close the project out after June 30th. Okay, is that it, Sarah? We're already 2 minutes over, so.
Not yet. Just to be clear, is CCA going to PM the awarded projects? County was concerned about their staff having to coordinate the project.
Yeah, so CCA can be part of the project management process. So right now we have contracted with CCA to do the technical assistance portion. And so they will not be a part of the review committee whatsoever. They, if anything, they might help us look at applications just for the construction side because they have that expertise, but they will not be part of the review committee. And so then once the applications have been reviewed and we've awarded the projects, at that point is when CCA can come back into play, depending if the awardee has reached out to them. The recipient of the funds have reached out to them to do project management. And so that is a service that they can do, and that's something that you can account for too within the budget for the project management. And so real quick, I did want to mention, since we're 3 minutes over 3 o'clock, I know we started a few minutes late, so if you have to jump off, please remember that this is recorded and we will post this on our website as soon as we can, and at the same page that I showed you earlier. And if you still have time, then we can stay on and keep answering questions.
Okay. Is prevailing wage and construction bonds a requirement?
This is another question that we did get. So prevailing wages are a requirement if you're using government funds or state funds. So for sure, while this project is being completed or while the project is being done, you would have to do prevailing wages. So I know we had a follow-up question to that. If like the applicant had outside funding or funding from their own pocket that they were going to put into this project, if that would also be considered prevailing wages. And that's the part that I need to look into to see if that would apply to other funding sources or if it's just to the state funds that are provided. So that will be a follow-up if you have that question. Oh, Kathy raised her hand, so she might have more information on that.
I am pretty sure, right? Of course, we want to get an official answer, but if there's any state funds involved, prevailing wage would be what you would need to agree to in the grant agreement. So I do not see a way to segregate that, but of course, would want an official answer. However, I think that's really how that's going to be handled.
Okay, thank you.
I know we mentioned labor earlier and budget template. Should we lump our labor costs into the construction contract line item if that is where we anticipate the labor coming from?
Yes. Yeah.
That's all the questions I have.
Perfect. All right. Well, if nothing else, I thank you very much for your time and your patience with all this program. This is very exciting to finally get to this point, and I know we have a long way to go before we actually award funds and get projects started. So I will not take any more of your time, but look forward to the questions in this workshop being posted on our website. Like I mentioned, if there's any other questions, please send them over to Jasmine. She can help out with that, and we can kind of get those questions answered as best as we can before our application deadline in a few days. So thank you very much. And Ben Brown also is available. Ben, maybe we can post, or actually Jasmine's information is on our website. So you can always send those answers or the questions over to Ben, right? If they need help with the writing.
Absolutely. I can always forward the messages to Ben, and Ben can always put his input in as well.
Perfect. And Ben, did you have anything to add?
Not to speak for you, Ben.
Yeah.
No, this was really informative. I appreciate all the work you and Sarah put into hosting this. And everybody just reach out if you have any questions, particularly about how you're structuring your grant or specific grant related questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.